The body cam footage of George Floyd's arrest gets leaked. We're going to try to bring some clarity to the Breonna Taylor shooting. And racism has taken point in this election cycle. So we'll get into that and look at a billionaire's take on so-called white privilege. And then a police chief's home gets targeted by rioters, so they write a letter lamenting cancel culture and asking their city council to step up. All of that and more straight ahead. I'm Big E, and this is the Liberty Cast. We have a ton of stuff to talk about this week, including the body cam footage of George Floyd's arrest. And does it add some context to the officer's actions? We will also examine the Breonna Taylor case and try to answer the question of who is at fault? Is anyone? And we will get into a prominent and beloved leftist unwittingly be clowning themselves in the name of racism. So let's hit it.
Hit it, sweetheart.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison had, to this point, refused to release the body cam footage of the George Floyd arrest, and now we know why. The footage was leaked to the Daily Mail, and they published it. So if you haven't seen the video, here's a clip. It's a bit longer than usual, but I think it's worth it.
See your hands.
Damn, man.
Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand.
I'm sorry.
Let me see your other hand.
Please,
Both hands.
do nothing.
Put your hands up right now. Let me see your other hand.
What we do?
Put your hand up there. Put your hand up there. Hands on the wheel.
Man, I got shot the same way as I was before.
Okay, well, when I say let me see your hands, you put your hands up.
I'm so sorry, man.
You got them?
Man, dang, man.
Put your hands on top of your head. Get out of the car.
I didn't know this. I didn't know.
Right now.
Oh, ouchie,
What
man.
are you on something right now?
No, nothing. You acting erratic.
Let's go.
Yeah, man. Yeah, please. I'm just claustrophobic. That's it.
Well, you're still going in the car.
Yo, I'm gonna die in here. I'm gonna die, man.
You need to take a seat right now.
And I just had COVID, man. I don't want to go back to that.
Okay, I'll roll the window
No.
down. Hey,
Please, officer. Please, please.
take a seat.
Please, man. Please. No.
Take a seat.
I can't choke. I can't breathe, officer. Please.
Fine.
My wrist, man. Please. I can't take this, man. I can't. I'm gonna lay on the ground.
Get in the squad.
Now, that was edited, but I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and take a look at the entire video. It's about 8 minutes long. It kind of sheds a new light on things, doesn't it? It added a bit of context and perspective. Does it exonerate former Officer Chauvin and the rest of them? Not completely. But I don't really see how, considering what we've already seen, and now with this new footage, how they will be able to get a murder conviction. It was already going to be tough. I'd said when Ellison first amended the charges and upped it to second-degree murder, that it was going to be tough to convict. The footage is pretty self-explanatory in terms of why he wanted to keep it under wraps. I'm not sure that it provides anything exculpatory, but it certainly doesn't support a second-degree murder charge. Of course, the left is still trying to spin it as though the footage doesn't change anything. Ben Crump, an attorney for Floyd's family, said in a statement that the leaked video shows Floyd did not pose a threat. Quote, "The police officers approached him with guns drawn," not true, "simply because he was a black man," not true. As the video shows, he never posed a threat, also not true. The officers' contradictions continue to build. If not for the videos, the world might never have known about the wrongs committed against George Floyd. Maybe true. But I said before, and I'll say again, for the cheap seats, George Floyd did not deserve to die. However, to say that he was not a threat is just ignorant. And they didn't approach with guns drawn. That happened after he refused to comply with an order to show his hands. Some other outlet had some LAPD veteran weigh in and say that he didn't understand why the officer drew down on Floyd. All that tells me is that they either didn't see the footage or are intentionally trying to gaslight us. Now, in light of this, one has to wonder, if this footage had been released early on, would we be dealing with the riots and civil unrest that we've been dealing with since Floyd was killed? And let's be honest, the riots have been a boon to the left's cause. They are counting on it to be instrumental in helping Biden's VP pick win in November, which is why the leftist media has largely been silent on this. They need the riots. They need the destruction. They need for the people to see the lawlessness so they can attempt to pin the unrest on President Trump. We're going to revisit the issue of the unrest and destruction later on in the show. But right now, I want to talk about another case where the police are accused of misconduct. Breonna Taylor was killed back in March when Louisville police executed a no-knock raid on her apartment. Now, there's a bit of misinformation surrounding this tragic incident, and it is a tragedy. So let's try and get some clarity around it. I said that the police executed a no-knock raid on her apartment. They did obtain a no-knock, but not only did a neighbor confirm that they actually knocked, Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, said that they both heard banging at the door, which got them out of bed. The warrant gave them legal authority to just go ahead and knock the door down and make entry into the apartment, but they chose not to do that. So Taylor and Walker started to get dressed, and Walker also grabbed his gun, and they both headed towards the door. And as they got into the hallway and were approaching the door, the cops broke it down. At which point, Walker fired his legally owned weapon, hitting one of the officers in the leg. The officers obviously returned fire and hit Ms. Taylor 5 to 8 times. Now, I have some thoughts on that, and I'll get to that in a second. But of course, the left-wing media hacks and race-pimping activists have tried to cast this as yet another case of the police hunting down and slaughtering black people, which is simply not true. It's been widely reported that she was hit 8 times. Some other reporting states that she was hit 5 times. We don't have the official autopsy report yet, so we won't know that for sure until that gets released. But not only does the data not support the narrative that cops are racist and hunting down black people, but in this situation specifically, they were shot at. And it was justified for them to be shot at. I hear someone breaking down my door, and trust and believe, I'm going to open fire. And I'd like to think that I wouldn't just hit them in the leg, although Walker said that he fired a warning shot at the ground, and that's a whole other story that we won't get into right now. But naturally, after getting shot at, they returned fire. Now, something that's always struck me as a bit odd was that the one who fired, the police stated that they saw him with the gun in the hallway, yet Taylor was the one who was killed. I don't attribute that to racism as much as poor training. I mean, how does the guy who fired the shot, and again, the cops stated that they saw them both in the hallway and that they saw that he was the one with the gun. If the motive were race, I would think they both would have been killed. Now, I know that things happen. I know that it was a charged situation, but they supposedly trained for these situations. So how did they fire over 20 rounds and not hit the actual threat once? That's just bizarre to me. Now, as tragic as this was, it's not evidence of a widespread effort by police to hunt down and kill black people. This was the result of faulty intelligence on the part of the police, bad training or lack of training, and an unnecessary show of force. The police were looking for a man by the name of Jamarcus Glover, who was the ex-boyfriend of Breonna Taylor. He's a known drug dealer, and his home was raided at the same time as Taylor's. They believed, based on some very circumstantial evidence, that he and Taylor were either in business together, or at the very least, he was using her address to receive illicit packages of some kind. And in the application for the warrant, they claim that they observed him repeatedly go to her apartment and receive packages, presumably to avoid detection by law enforcement. There was no mention of what was in these packages, so it could have been anything. I mean, they were ex-boyfriend and girlfriend. This is a tenuous connection to illegal activity at best, hardly worthy of a breach by SWAT. This woman, by all accounts, was a great person who had no record, no history of violence, and had not been charged with any crime, ever. So let's review. Breonna Taylor's ex was a known drug dealer. Her current boyfriend is a concealed carry permit holder with a legally owned firearm. There was no evidence that she ever committed a crime. The police broke down her door in the middle of the night without knowing who was in the apartment, and one of them got shot. They returned fire, hit multiple times the person who did not fire the weapon, while the person who was holding the gun came out without a scratch. Now, despite what the leftist media and other race baiters would have us believe, racism had nothing to do with this. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If you're watching or listening to this, you are probably already aware of NICS and what it does. For the uninitiated, NICS checks are the background checks conducted whenever someone goes to purchase a firearm. These are conducted at retail stores and at gun shows. There is no gun show loophole. There were 3.6 million NICS checks conducted in July of 2020. That is the third highest number of checks conducted in 1 month since they began tracking it back in 1998. The record is 3.9, which was just set the month prior, which beat the previous record set in March of this year at 3.7. And black folks account for the highest increase among all demos. Perhaps because a lot of the rioting that's taking place is taking place in predominantly black neighborhoods. Now, we've talked about it before, but that increase in March was primarily due to the pandemic panic induced by our government's ridiculous response to the Chinese virus. People were being robbed of their groceries. There were shortages of a number of necessities, and people panicked. They wanted to be able to protect themselves should the bad guys come calling to steal their stuff, Walking Dead style. And then George Floyd died, and all hell broke loose. Riots in Minneapolis, Portland, and other major cities across the country. People were being attacked and killed at the hands of Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters, anarchists. Then the calls for defunding the police kicked off. Jurisdictions like Minneapolis actually held votes to disband the police. And amid all the unrest and the anarchy, people no longer felt like the police could or even wanted to protect them. They wanted to, but they were hamstrung. But this is a provable hypothesis. When you consider you let dangerous criminals out of jail, you refuse to hold them after they've been arrested, when you make it nearly impossible to legally buy firearms and then prosecute citizens when they do use a firearm to protect themselves or their property, whether a shot is fired or not. Is there any way to interpret that as them trying to keep you safe? So people adopted the mindset that I and others have been telling them all along. You are your own best first responder. So now we're in the middle of a pandemic, 40 million people out of work due to the government shutdown. Black Lives Matter and Antifa are rioting in the streets, burning down businesses, burning down police stations, burning down courthouses, beating people up, stabbing, shooting, wreaking death and destruction on all of these cities. And as of this taping, I think it's 72 straight days, nearly 2.5 months of rioting in Portland. And these Black Lives Matter anti-First Amendment scumbags, that's what Antifa really means, anti-First Amendment, have threatened to take this nonsense to the burbs and rural areas.
Just bring it!
Seriously, come with it if you want to. But we saw this play out at the in the McCluskey case, and another one which we'll get into later on in the show. The police all across the country are being hamstrung by corrupt politicians. They are letting violent, dangerous criminals out of jail because they might catch the Chinese virus. And now with bail reform, some violent criminals are being let go after an arrest only to commit the same or even worse crimes immediately. As an example, Darius Sutton, New York gangbanger, was released without bail on an attempted murder charge because the witness recanted. After which, he went on to engage in 3 more drive-bys, allegedly. Now, considering all of that, is it any wonder why gun sales are skyrocketing? Shelves in gun stores are bare, ammunition is hard to come by? Of course not. Now, let me just add on to this issue of bail reform for a second. We were told that it would make us safer. It wasn't supposed to apply to violent criminals. In a story on Slate, they wrote, quote, "Any reform that means locking fewer people up inevitably inspires a punitive backlash and concerns about public safety. But the bail reform law may actually make New York safer." And Comrade de Blasio said as much a few weeks ago. I think Sutton's 7 victims and their families, and those are just the ones that we know about, would disagree. So given all of that, how likely is it that the gun control issue is going to have an effect on the election in November? I don't know that it's likely to have a significant impact, even though there are a lot of Democrats buying their first gun. They're still very likely to support leftist gun control measures, and I don't think that their desire to protect themselves and their families from an immediate threat is going to override a deep-seated commitment to gun control. Owning a gun and understanding what the Second Amendment really means is new to them. And as they hopefully educate themselves and get training and talk to more Second Amendment advocates, that can change. But I don't see that. I don't see that kind of transformation happening for the majority of these people before November. Now, I don't know if you have noticed, but race and racism have become the single most dominant topic in our national consciousness. So much for that post-racial era Obama was supposed to usher in. I think he's to blame for a lot of what's happening right now, but Black Lives Matter and their leftist handlers have managed to convince enough people that all of the problems that the country is facing right now are a result of systemic or institutional racism. You have city governments mandating implicit bias training for their employees. You have governors declaring racism a public health crisis. And then you have a billionaire telling white people that they need to check their privilege.
Well, what I was going to say, and then I'll let you answer it, white people, there are white people who are not as powerful as the system of white people, the caste system that's been put in place, but they still, no matter where they are on the rung or the ladder of success, they still have their whiteness.
Seth, I'll say it like this. Yes, it is. It is. You can never generalize in life, in general, right? You can never generalize. Now, when I'm saying white people, I am speaking of the proverbial white people. I'm not saying like you, white person. I'm saying proverbially, historically, white people have had power. But think about this, because I got a lot of backlash when I brought up white privilege. Because some people are like, wait a second, I'm a poor white person. Your parents were doctors. How can you say I'm privileged? White privilege isn't saying your life hasn't been hard. White privilege is just saying your skin color, it hasn't attributed to the difficulty of your life.
I don't know about you, but hearing this from Oprah and former UT and NFL football player Emmanuel Acho just rings hollow. Oprah is worth $2 billion, one of the richest women in the world. She came from nothing. And Acho, his parents are doctors. He grew up as privileged as anyone ever could, short of a millionaire or billionaire's kids, or Oprah's if she had ever had any. And I've said before, there is no way you can tell me that I and my siblings, growing up as the children of a lawyer and a librarian in the suburbs, were less privileged than the white kids in Southie whose father was in jail and mother was barely hanging on and popping pills or getting drunk every night. It just doesn't pass the smell test for anyone with an ounce of common sense. And think about this. Oprah grew up dirt poor. She was abused by a family member for years. She overcame that, became a reporter, then the host of a morning talk show, parlayed that into a gig as a syndicated talk show host, and then went on to become one of the most beloved media figures in the history of this country. Yet she has the temerity to talk about whiteness being an advantage, which by definition means she is disadvantaged. In what world can anyone say with a straight face that Oprah or Emmanuel Acho or I am disadvantaged? I haven't achieved the level of success that she has, and few people will, regardless of race or gender. But the opportunity is there for all of us, and it comes down to the choices that we make. And skin color plays no part in that. And while we're on the subject of race, and I wasn't going to get into this because it just seemed like piling on, but then the very next day we got hit with another one. So, of course, I'm talking about Joe Biden. He's given us a trove of gaffes since he announced his run for the presidency, held throughout his entire career. But his most recent ones would be political comedy gold if it wasn't so obvious that he is mentally just not there. And we will dig into that right after this quick break. What's happening with Biden is abuse, and I've been saying for the better part of a year now that his family needs to put a stop to this. And what am I talking about? Well, by now you've all heard this one.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black. Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
That was Biden on The Breakfast Club with Charlemagne. Now, if Trump had said that during his campaign, rather than, what have you got to lose? You can imagine the apoplexy that would have gripped the media. And I mean, they already had him labeled as a racist, so that just would have been icing on the cake. But Biden followed that up with this.
Please clarify specifically, have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say to President Trump, who brags about his test and makes your mental state an issue for voters?
Well, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but I mean, I'm so forward looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates. There's going to be plenty of time. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness, and to make a judgment about who I am.
Apparently, he didn't remember that he had said this.
Have you been tested for some degree of cognitive decline?
I've been tested, and I'm constantly tested. Look, all I got to do is watch me, and I can hardly wait to compare my cognitive capability to the cognitive capability of the man I'm running against.
Now, these 3 sound bites would likely be enough to get any Republican booted from the campaign, even at this late date. But these are just some of the most recent gaffes. He's been a machine since he announced. Remember, lying dog-faced pony soldier, look fat? He's just not all there. And it's sad to watch someone who should be enjoying his twilight years with his grandchildren stroking his leg hair. Anyway, it's just sad. But then he came out of his face with this.
And by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things.
Again, the media would be in a nuclear meltdown if Trump had said something like this. When you take everything that he said into consideration, there's no way to mitigate or downplay or deny Biden's racism at this point. And you have to think that he's been hiding it, albeit not very well if you've been paying attention to his career. But he's been hiding it throughout his career, and now that his faculties are diminished, he can't hide it anymore. Anyone who is still denying that Joe Biden is experiencing a cognitive decline is being willfully blind to what's right in front of us, which is almost as sad as the decline itself. Now, let me circle back to the first quote about "you ain't black." I mentioned last week how I read something that really stuck with me, which was that more and more being black no longer refers to skin color, but rather one's acceptance of or belief in a set of leftist political ideas. I don't remember where I read this, but when I find it again, I will hat tip that person, because even though this is not a new concept and it's something that I've kind of dealt with for my whole life, I've never been able to articulate or heard it articulated quite that succinctly before. I mean, when I was a kid, I was often told that I wasn't black because I spoke proper English. I remember in my 20s when Ebonics was all the rage and there was talk of making it a language. There were people I knew who thought that that was a good thing and questioned my blackness for not supporting it. And as an adult, my blackness has been questioned for a whole host of reasons by people all the time. I think even down here in Texas, people are surprised at how conservative I am, or that I'm conservative at all. But I was told by people who I thought were my friends, known them for 20, 30 years, and there were other things said in this exchange that ended that supposed friendship. But I was told by these people that I wasn't black and that I hated myself because I didn't vote for or support Obama. And now Biden thinks that extends to him and all these leftist candidates. After his racist gaffes, and you can't even really call them gaffes at this point because his cognitive ability is in such decline that it's making it impossible for him to hide his true nature. But after his remarks about black folks over the past few months, how can they possibly expect black people to turn out and vote for him? Are they counting on Trump derangement syndrome to be that powerful a force? They must. All right, let's get into a few quick stories and then get you out of here with some epic stupidity. But first, Facebook censored the Save the Children hashtag. It was temporary, but they censored it nonetheless because accounts and posts associated with the QAnon movement, conspiracy theory, whatever that is, were using that hashtag. Now, I don't really understand how a hashtag can get blocked based on who uses it, but that's what happened. Now, it's a given that they hate conservatives and will censor us at any time for any reason. But child sex trafficking isn't a right or left thing. It isn't a conservative or liberal thing. Now, it was just a hashtag, but the message, the mission of saving children from that horror should transcend political ideology. It should be out there in the forefront of our consciousness. And censoring that is just bad optics. And the reason given for the censorship was pathetic. All right, next story. Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best sent a letter to the city council after one of her residences was targeted by Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters. But they were thwarted by her neighbors.
Get the fuck out of my neighborhood now. You're not fucking kidding. Get the fuck out of my neighborhood now. You guys need to get the fuck out of here. Get out of here.
This is not the way to get stuff done, you guys.
Hey, shut the fuck up.
No, this is our neighborhood. You're doing the wrong thing, you guys. I'm sure you mean well.
Get out of here.
We are here to peacefully assemble.
The cops are coming. Go peacefully assemble up on the private road up there. There's a private drive. Get out of the road.
You pointed a gun at
I have not pointed a gun at anybody.
We're here to peacefully assemble.
Go.
No. Peacefully assemble in somebody else's fucking neighborhood.
We are peaceful.
Go.
You pointed a gun at my face.
Yep.
That's why you're peaceful.
Go.
No, we were always peaceful.
I saw how many cars were here.
Go.
We don't have guns.
Thank you. Thank you.
Don't come back.
Did you catch that? We were peaceful because we had guns. But listen to some of what she wrote. Quote, I urge both of you and the entire council to stand up for what is right. These direct actions against elected officials, and especially civil servants like myself, are out of line with and go against every democratic principle that guides our nation. Before this devolves into the new way of doing business by mob rule here in Seattle and across the nation, elected officials like you must forcefully call for the end of these tactics. I think that ship sailed a long time ago, but anyway, she should have sent that letter a couple of months ago when Chaz Chop first cropped up. But that aside, this is a logical extension of cancel culture. They've been doxing people they don't like and targeting homes of elected officials and media figures that they don't like throughout this whole thing, even before that. They told us they were bringing it to the burbs, and I think Carmen Best has proven that she's not up to the task of being the police chief. I know I'm going to get labeled a misogynist now for that, even though I call out idiots like Comrade de Blasio and Don Lamont all the time. But anyway. Next story I want to talk about. There was a massive explosion in Beirut, and the story went through a few iterations. First, it was a missile attack by Israel, which was debunked. Then it was an accident at a fireworks factory. And if you saw that explosion, if you saw that video, that excuse was obviously horseshit. But the final story, and that everyone's going with, is that there was a fire that was triggered the detonation of 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate. Why that much ammonium nitrate was there seems a bit fishy, but the official story is that it appears to be a tragic accident. But what I want to talk about is what happened just before the explosion. Take a look at this. Did you notice those white flashes? It was the first thing I noticed when I saw it for the first time. And it looks to me like there could be a firefight going on in that building. And my thought was that there was something going down at that building, and the explosion was either part of it, or now, based on how much ammonium nitrate was there, a result of it. And finally, you know how the left is actively trying to erase history, even though they say that They aren't erasing it, they're just removing the reminders of all the offensive stuff. Well, they just took a massive step forward in not just erasing it, but rewriting it. Listen to Illinois State Rep. LaShawn Ford's proposal.
So today, I'm calling for the abolishment of history classes in Illinois. We're concerned that current school history teachings lead to white privilege and a racist society.
He goes on in that clip to talk about getting a refund from all of the publishers of all of the history books ever used in the state. I mean, come on, how ridiculous is that? And someone is going to sign off on this madness. Anyway, folks, that's our show. I will try to do better the next time. I know I teased talking about the Second Amendment going away and the thought police coming to the fore, but so much broke this week that I had to get into it, and we'll just have to do that another time. I also didn't get a chance to touch on that meritocracy article, and we will get to it at some point, I promise. But I do want to thank you all for watching and listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please take a second to hit the subscribe button, and so you never miss an episode. If you'd rather listen because I have a face for radio, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, whichever podcast platform you prefer, please like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us in the ratings. We are also on the interwebs at thelibertycast.net. Just go to the podcast page, and you will find all the latest podcasts. And we're also on the rightway.site. And of course, we're on social media, Parler, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms. So again, folks, thank you all for spending this time with me, whether you're watching or listening. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.